as a quick introduction to Java 10, it came out a couple of weeks ago. This probably took a lot of us by surprise because our Java release cadence has been traditionally quite a lot of time between Java releases. Java 9 only came out in September, and now Java 10 is already out and already ready to be used, which, even though I was ready for it, kind of took me a little bit by surprise. Interestingly, because of the way that the support model has changed from Oracle, if you were using Java 9, you should move to Java 10 straight away because Java 9 has been replaced by Java 10. If you're on Java 8, then you might want to consider the leap in a bit more time because Java 8 is a long-term supported version, which Java 9 was not. But just to quickly cover the features which came into Java 10, we have a handful of features here. A lot of them probably don't impact us as developers very much. So there's things like consolidate the JDK forest into a single repository, a bunch of things which actually help them release Java more frequently, things which are normal housekeeping stuff under the covers, some interesting stuff around the garbage collector, which we're not going to cover today because it's quite a specialized thing, but does open up possibilities for future improvements around garbage collectors. The thing that most people are interested in from a Java 10 point of view is local variable type inference. This is the ability to use the var keyword instead of declaring on both sides of the equals sign what the type is. And this is what we're going to spend most of the webinar looking at. What does this mean? How does it work in IntelliJ IDEA? What are the implications for Java? So looking at IntelliJ IDEA specifically, obviously this is a JetBrains webinar, so we're going to look at how to do this inside IntelliJ IDEA. IntelliJ IDEA has had the ability to let you compile your code against Java 10 even before Java 10 came out. So let's just quickly recover how to change your JDK so that you're using whichever one you choose. Andre, I just want to check the resolution of this screen looks okay, right? You can read that.
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, great. So if you bring up the project settings, in project, you can see what your project SDK is. I already have a version of Java 10 here. I've even got 11, the early access one. But if you need to select a new JDK because you've just downloaded 10, you say new, JDK, and then you're going to select, this is on the Mac, obviously, so the path here is specific to the Mac, but you're going to select whichever one you want. So in this case, 10, contents home, and then you open that, and that will allow you to add a new JDK. I don't need to do that because I've already got one. So I'm going to select Java 10. Oh, yes, I'm going to select Java 10, and then I'm going to select my project language level, which is where IntelliJ IDEA helps you in terms of showing you which features you can use from this language. So you could compile against Java 10, but have it look like you're using an earlier version if you want. But we're going to go with 10 and 10. And this is going to allow you to use the new feature in Java 10, which is use the var keyword. I need to rebuild it first. Hold on. So while it's having to rebuild the whole thing inside using Java 10. Well, look at that. What did I do wrong? There's always something. Oh, if you've got multiple modules, sometimes the modules themselves will have a different SDK here. So sometimes you have to go in and make sure that those are set to 9 as well. Now, the good thing is I don't want to use this particular project, so I can ignore that and go to one that actually works. So if we have a look here at the Java 10 stuff here, the main feature that we've been talking about is the ability to use var there instead of using the full type declaration. Now, at this point, I could probably end the webinar and say, that's Java 10. It works in IntelliJ IDEA. But obviously, there's a bit more to it than that. For example, I want to talk a bit about how IntelliJ IDEA will help you use the keyword, and I want to talk a little bit about the best practices of this, because this is quite a big change for Java, the language. If you've been using other JVM languages like Kotlin or like Groovy or some of these other JVM languages, you'll know already that you can use things like var to prevent duplicating on both sides of the equal sign what that type is. So if you've been using another JVM language, this is familiar to you. But if you've been using just Java, this is quite a big change. And it looks like you're moving towards a more dynamic version of the language. And that's not true. You've still got full type safety. It's just a removal of some of the syntax. Unlike Kotlin, Kotlin has the idea of var and val, as do some of the other languages, but Java's only doing var, and you can still use the final keyword to say that you're not going to change that value. So it's either final var or var for just a variable which you can reassign. Now, it's important to note as well, this is for local variables, so variables inside a method. It doesn't work for fields, so you can't do it here. It doesn't work for return types, so you can't do it here because that doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't work for parameters because that doesn't really make any sense. You can't define that because there's no way to figure out what that type really is if you just say it's something. So it works only on local variables here, so things inside the methods. Now, IntelliJ IDEA will help you figure out the places where your code could make use of this if you want to. So this is using inspections. Inspections are one of my favorite parts of IntelliJ IDEA because it helps me migrate my code to use something perhaps cleaner or more modern that I might not have been aware of. So if I open up my preferences window, so I did that by using command and comma on the Mac, but you can also do it from file preferences. Do you know, I don't know. I always use the keyboard shortcut. So anyway, you can use it from here. And here you've got inspections. And you've got Java language level migration aids. And the Java 10 ones here are the ability to say the local variable type can be omitted, which is where you can replace it with var. And you have the inverse as well. So you can replace var with the full declaration if you want to. By default, these are set to no highlighting, only fix. What that means is, if I show you, if I do Alt and Enter on something like this, it shows me that I can replace it with var if I want to. And similarly, if I do Alt and Enter, it will allow me to replace it with the explicit type. But it won't show me any warnings, it won't highlight that code. I have to know that that's an area where I can use this new keyword. For the purpose of this webinar and for the purpose of me getting up to speed on Java 10, I'm going to change this so that I can highlight these places in the code. So I'm going to set it to weak warning. And then that way, it will show me here in gray that the local variable can be omitted, the explicit type can be omitted. These suggestions, you can see if we look through this code, it's suggested in some places and not in others. And I want to talk a little bit about what those are so that you have an idea of why these suggestions might be available or when they might not be. So here we have an array list on both sides here. And we've also got the full type, an array list of person inside the generics. So that is an example where we can just automatically replace that with var, and it works exactly the same way it used to. We can use a keyboard shortcut on the variable. I'm going to use Control and J. Oh, and I'm using the old Mac keyboard shortcuts. If you look at the bottom, you can see the different keyboard shortcuts for the different key maps. If I do Control and J, then it shows me what the kind of underneath type is, what the type is under the covers. So the fact that I've used the word var to declare this doesn't mean that it doesn't have a type. It's still an array list of people, an array list containing person objects. And IntelliJ IDEA will show you that information. Now, down here, I have an array list of person, but it's assigned to a list. And IntelliJ IDEA is not suggesting that that can be a var, because then you'd actually change the type information. Because if I do what we did up there and change that to a var, like I said, this is actually an array list of person objects, not a list of person objects. So if you were assigning it to an interface, then you won't get the suggestion that you can change that to var. You can still do it, but IntelliJ IDEA won't suggest it. The last place I want to point out where this suggestion is not going to be made is if you've got the same type here on both sides, but you use the diamond operator. And there's a reason for this. With this declaration, this is an array list containing person objects, if I change this to var, then I get, let me show you what that type is. Then that is an array list of objects, because I've just got rid of the type information. By using the diamond operation, I haven't declared what type the objects are inside that array list. So I end up with an array list of objects. That's clearly not the same thing as an array list of person. I have to have person here. So diamond operator came in Java 7. It was super useful. I could get rid of all sorts of stuff. So I can get rid of all this noise here. But in terms of using var, it's no longer useful because you need to have this type information somewhere. It needs to be either on the left-hand side or on the right-hand side. You can't get rid of it completely. So that's kind of a quick overview of using var, kind of, and how IntelliJ IDEA will help you to use that. I kind of wanted to go through some of the best practices. There's a page on the OpenJDK website which has a long list of best practice, kind of do's and don'ts around using var, and some examples to consider. And it's well worth reading if you're going to move to Java 10, because I can definitely see the case where you could scatter var throughout your whole code base, and you might lose some meaning. The idea of introducing this into the language is to reduce boilerplate, to reduce duplication, and to ease readability, to make your code more readable by getting rid of clutter. But as you can see, there's sometimes when the clutter is necessary, some of that type information is mandatory, or at least provides a lot more readability for the user. So I want to go through some of the examples from that document to kind of show what are the when are the good times to use var and when are the not so great times to use var. And as you'll see, IntelliJ IDEA kind of helps with some of these suggestions, but not all of them, because this is definitely a case where we as developers have to think about what is the best thing for the people who are reading our code. This is not something which can be programmatically implemented by magic. This is very much a decision for us as developers to take. The first guideline is choose variable names that provide useful information. Now, of course, we probably all do this anyway. Of course, our variable names are useful. We're going to call it something that when we come back to this code later, we know what that means. But every now and again, we do end up putting in something which perhaps might not be so useful, like I'm going to assign this to temp. Now, if I put that into var, I'm using a method to get something, and then I'm doing something with it that doesn't require me to know what that type is. So now I really have no idea what's inside this variable. I don't know what it represents. I don't know what it's for. I don't know what methods are available on it. Obviously, because I'm using an IDE, then I can do things like I can still get my code completion. It still tells me that this is going to be a list and it has list type of methods on it. That's fine. And I can also use the IDE to inspect what the type is. But just by simply reading the code, I don't get that information. So I'd be much better off if I rename this something so it's more readable. So let's say all people, for example. It's slightly less readable, or even something like a list of person. It doesn't have to be. You don't have to use exactly the same type information in the name, but you do need to consider when someone's reading this code, given that there's no type here, what are they going to be thinking when they see this? So it's a good idea to use useful variable names if you're going to use this. Another interesting thing is if you're going to have a big method which perhaps has some variables assigned up near the top, and then you do some stuff near the bottom of the method on these variables, you have to consider the impact on the user if you start changing these. So let's say we have this as, we declare this with var, and that all compiles, that's all fine, there's no problem with it whatsoever. But it may be that somewhere along the line, later on, we say we actually want this to be a hash set instead of an array list. And if this for loop is quite close to that declaration, when I change this type, I can see there's a for loop here, and I need to understand, well, I will understand that iteration order is different for hash sets than it is for array lists. But if there was a lot of code here and I don't see this loop when I start to mess around with the type here, then I don't necessarily know the implications of that change I made. Again, this is kind of common sense stuff. This is not specific necessarily to var, but it does mean that if you are going to use the var keyword, that you do need to consider some of this fundamental common sense stuff from a readability point of view. So another place where this is useful, in fact, a very specific place where it's useful is if you have duplication on both sides. So byte array output stream, this can really nicely be changed to use var. And the same here, it doesn't have to be just constructors, which are the same thing, but if you've got factory methods, which it's quite clear what the factory method does, then you can quite safely replace that, and you're not really losing any of the readability there. Where you sometimes are going to is if perhaps you don't have a good name and the variable comes from something which also doesn't have a very clear name. Once I replace that with var, I really have no information about what those variables are, where it came from, what it does, what it's for. So this might not be a good place for removing that information. This might be better off if I keep that there. And we've already covered this a little bit. This guideline is take care when using var with diamond or generic methods. And you can see here that IntelliJ IDEA is suggesting that I can change this to use var, because I know that if I say list.of, which is one of the new factory methods from Java 9, if I say list.of with a string, I'm going to get a list of strings. Let's see. I'm going to get a list of strings. That's safe. But here, if I say list.of, there's no information there about what's the type of inside that list. So if IntelliJ IDEA doesn't suggest that I can change this to use var. I could if I wanted to, but again, you'll see that we're going to get not what we expect. We get a list of object there. So we don't get the suggestion there. Similarly, we have the same thing here. This is about the diamond operator again. So if we're using the diamond operator, then we won't get the suggestion that we can change that to var, because we're going to get an array list of objects, not an array list of strings. So those are the guidelines that came out from the OpenJDK fairly recently. So some of those are kind of codified in the way that IntelliJ IDEA does its inspections, which is quite nice. It means that it will suggest use of var in places where it's sensible. It won't suggest using var in places where it's actually going to change the type or change some of your expected behavior. But on the other hand, you still have to think in terms of, is this a friendly name? Is it understandable? What's happening here? Does it add to the readability or does it not add to the readability? I've got a few more examples, but I think now might be a quite good time to pause and see if there's any questions.
Yep, there are a few questions. Okay, let me go through the list. Yeah, a bunch of questions about the recording, about the audio. Okay. Does IntelliJ IDEA already support Java 10 with Maven? So to my knowledge, it does support it
Yes.
out of the box, and I do believe that it relies on Maven itself. Tricia?
Yes, and in fact, this is a Maven project. In order to get it working, I had to not only change my project SDK to 10, but I also had to change my POM so that I was compiling against 1.10, which was kind of weird, but I changed it from 1.9 to 1.10, and everything compiles and runs with Maven and IntelliJ IDEA.
Great. Then a question about the support roadmap. Okay, I'll read it and then we see if we can answer it. Can you explain a little more? Java 9 not supported for a long time, but Java 8 is. Impacts on why should I move to Java 10?
Okay, this is actually an excellent question. It's not so much a question for us as a question for Oracle, because we're talking about the Oracle JRE JDK for this, really. So the long-term support thing that I mentioned is for the Oracle Java implementation. And they have chosen, because they're going to release twice a year from now on, they're not going to provide long-term support for every single one of their releases. They're going to provide long-term support for, I think it's every 1 in 3 or something like that. So they're providing long-term support for Java 8, because they know a lot of people are happy with Java 8 and want to stick with Java 8. They're going to provide long-term support for Java 11, which is coming out in September. So a lot of enterprises are quite sensibly going to ask, why should I move to 9 or 10 when there's no long-term support? I'm going to wait for 11. And that's fine. That's totally a perfectly acceptable thing to do. But there are other organizations who might want to move to 9, take the hit of moving to something like 9, because it was quite a big change with some of the changes with modules and the way that the JDK itself is structured, and then incrementally move to 10 so that they can get some of the changes which came in 10, and then move to 11 so that they can make the adjustments. And this is much more of a sort of continuous delivery, continuous integration way of thinking, in terms of let's make small incremental changes frequently so that we only have to take a small hit rather than the big hit of moving from Java 8 to Java 11. So it's very much going to depend upon you and your organization and your sort of appetite for risk and the amount of time you want to wait before adopting some of the new features which come in the new versions of Java.
Yep. Also, there's a question. Okay, so var is broadly comparable to C++ auto, and without deep understanding of how it works in C++, I would say the concept is quite similar. Trisha, do you have anything to comment on that?
I have to admit a shocking lack of knowledge for C++.
Yeah,
I don't know yet.
So it's better to check it with someone who knows. And yeah, as from what I know about this, it is very like auto in C++, which is basically inference of the type from the declaration.
I'll look that up as well. And when we do the blog post, which has the recording of this video and some of the answers to questions, we can also answer that question in the blog post.
Yep, cool. Okay. One more comment about the keyword var. So it is purely readability aspect. Is that correct? It has no functional changes.
Right. It has no functional changes in terms of it's meant to reduce boilerplate, it's meant to aid readability. It can make your code change if, for example, you decide to, here where we have a declaration of list equals new array list, if I apply var here, that's making a change because now people is an array list, not a list. But that's really a feature of using var rather than a feature of var itself. The goal is to reduce boilerplate and increase readability, which is why it's really down to us to decide whether we're going to use it or not, because if it doesn't improve the readability, then there's no point in using it.
Yep. There is a question about the pop-up, about the green pop-up in the bottom of the screen. So it basically shows the keystrokes for the actions invoked by Trisha, and it does it automatically on the fly, and it shows the keystrokes for all operational systems.
Yeah, it shows them for the Mac on the 10.5 plus key map and for the Windows and Linux. But there's two key maps for the Mac. So sometimes when I say I'm using one set of keys, it might pop up and say it's using a different one because I'm not necessarily using the same key map.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on. Can you use instance of or perform explicit casting with var?
Yes. So I've actually got an example on one of these where I was doing an explicit cast, but let's say, where's an example? So I could do it. I can do. Let's turn this into a var here. And at the moment, this is a byte array output stream. if I do a cast here, I don't know, let's cast it to something stupid. Let's cast it to a string. Then, which is stupid because it's not going to work. But then my my stuff variable is going to be a string, so I can do it there. And alternatively, if I'm doing something like then I can cast that as well. The only reason it's erroring is because you can't cast byte array output stream to a string. Sorry, I just want to check this type, output stream. Yeah. So you can still use casting. I think what's confusing to me as a long-term Java developer who's not really worked with dynamic languages or with languages which provide these sorts of functionality is that it looks like there's no type information, or you're removing type information, or you're moving to a more dynamic way of working. It's not true. It's literally just getting rid of the boilerplate. It's just a sort of syntactic sugar, really.
Yep. Okay, moving on. Well, there is a question about this OpenJDK link you mentioned sometime before. I think we can add it to the blog post, right? So everyone gets.
I definitely will. It's here, but I will add it to the blog post because it's really important. It's quite long. Star guidelines for local variable type inference in Java, and it's great. It talks about the principles of what var is for. So a lot of these questions about, is it about readability, what's it for, and then it goes into a bunch of the specific guidelines that I've talked about. So what's good and what's not so good. So it's quite a long read, but it's definitely well worth reading.
Yep. You said at the beginning that we should switch from Java 9 to 10, this being long-term support. But when I tried to change the system JDK to 10, it broke up some theme elements of IntelliJ IDEA, primarily dark look and feel. For now, it works by having IntelliJ IDEA using Java 9 and using the Java 10 as project SDK. So maybe I can comment on that. First of all, IntelliJ IDEA uses its own JDK right now, and it is recommended that you don't change this, and you don't change the JRE which the IDE is running on. I believe what Trisha meant is your project. To my knowledge, IntelliJ IDEA so far is still on Java 8, and there are some plans to migrate to a new version. And I think that's it. And yeah, like I said, it is recommended to not change the default JRE which the IDE is running on. The IDE comes with built-in JRE.
Right, exactly. So that's what I'm showing here. I've brought up my my about box, and IntelliJ IDEA is running off its own JRE 1.8.0. My system Java home is currently set to Java 11 because I'm trying out some Java 11 stuff, and my project is set to use Java 10. So there's at least 3 levels that you could be talking about in terms of which version of Java you're using. For your project, obviously, the project is the easiest one to change. The project is the one you can change here. And it's really easy to change whichever version you want to use, and you can compile it against all of those. Obviously, if you change your system level one, the one that Java Home points to, that could potentially have an impact on everything that uses Java, but probably not IntelliJ IDEA because it uses its own built-in JRE.
Yep. Next question. Can we configure the IDE for warning us to change to war only in cases where we call constructor with the new keyword?
Not at the moment, but that sounds like a really good suggestion. Sorry, let's bring it up. So the inspection at the moment is literally, you can't configure it. It just says, it will tell you when you can use var and it won't change what your code's doing under the covers. There's definitely plans for expanding this. For example, we were looking at the best practice guidelines and seeing how many of these could we actually sort of codify inside the inspection. And I think that's a really interesting point. I think we should take that back as a suggestion.
Yep. There is a question maybe to other participants as well. I don't know if there is a way to chat. Does anyone know the fate of JAX-B with Java 10 and beyond?
I don't know the answer to
I
that.
personally cannot comment on that. Yeah, maybe. Well, if we find out, we mention that in the blog post.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any memory or performance considerations for utilizing var keyword?
I don't think
for
so.
example, yeah, yeah. Basically, it's just syntax sugar.
I believe so. I haven't looked at any differences in say like the bytecode that's generated, but I can't imagine there'd be any performance implications. It's not like streams where the implementation is very different to using a for loop, for example. And it's not like lambdas versus anonymous inner classes, which actually have different implementations under the covers.
Yeah, whatever the case, it affects only the compile time and not runtime for, well, in any case. And being local variables only scope, I don't think it affects compile time significantly.
I don't think so.
Yep.
But I don't know. I'll have a look. That's a good question. I'll look that up.
Good. Next question about how can I obtain the plugin? I don't see it listed in the repositories. I do believe that the question refers to the plugin assistant, and yeah, we can mention that in the blog post as well. So it is a publicly listed plugin. It's called Presentation Assistant.
Yep.
Right.
So you just plug it in, and you can configure that.
Yep.
It's my favorite plugin by far.
Yeah. Also, there is a question about JIT compiler performance, and yeah. So if Tricia, you find out, just mention that in the blog post. I think
I will. Yeah.
Do you know what the rationale was for choosing var only and not for var val systems like in Kotlin?
That's a great question. Brian Goetz, who's one of the architects of the Java, the language, he put out a poll on Twitter, I don't know, maybe a couple of years ago now, when they were starting to implement this. And the question was, do you prefer var and val, or do you prefer final and var, or do you prefer different keywords, because some of the languages use different words? And obviously, lots of people waded in on what they wanted to do and why and all the rest of it. But I don't remember the exact numbers of who responded, like what the percentages were. I think it was fairly close between final and var, which is what we've got, and var and val. Ultimately, the decision was made to do final and var because it's more consistent with the rest of Java. And whenever there's sort of difficult decisions to be made with Java, the language, ultimately the language architects always err on the side of backwards compatibility. Does it make sense from the point of view of people who come from older versions of Java? And this idea of having final and var plus var, while it's not super popular compared to the modern languages, it is much more consistent with the way that Java, the language, works. And we can still kind of suck it up and live with the fact that this final keyword has to be all over the place. One of the things I did want to point out, though, is that if you are a fan of using final in all the places where it should be used, if you're using var, it does make that a lot less wordy, a lot less verbose. It's not quite as succinct as saying val, but it does mean that you can start saying final everywhere without having even more heavy boilerplate everywhere.
Yep. If you can come back to your method, minimize the scope of local variables. When using var instead of array list with your reasoning, why does it make a difference if the change to hash set is on the top anyway, and with the for loop being on the bottom, wouldn't it make any difference?
It's about iteration order. So when this was an array list, and I add person 1, person 2, then when I iterate over that, I will get them out in the order they were put in, because that's a contract of array list. So I will see them printed out as first, second, and so forth. If I'm using a set in particular, which is why I chose set, set doesn't make the same promises around iteration order, because a set is not necessarily an ordered collection. A set is it's more of a bag of elements. So if I iterate over them, I'm not necessarily going to get them out in the same order that I put them in. In many cases, this might be fine, in which case that's okay. The whole point is that you want to be able to see all this code together. So if I make the change and I turn this to a hash set, and I see, oh, I'm iterating over this later on, that's fine. I don't care about iteration order in this case. Then at least I've made that conscious decision. But if I've made this change to a hash set and this loop is somewhere else, or perhaps in another method, then I am not making that conscious decision of changing the behavior of my for loop because I changed the data structure that it was iterating over. Does that make sense?
If it doesn't, then hopefully we'll see another comment from George. Sorry, from Francis Martin. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think meanwhile we can move on to another question. Is there any best practice surrounding upgrading an older code base to use vars? Example, is there a way to, for example, retrofit and mass using IntelliJ to assist in the effort? So not
Absolutely.
surely yeah.
Absolutely, there is. And in fact, I wanted to show this. So thank you for asking that question, because that allows me to demonstrate something. So here I've got, it is an older code base. It's not super old. It's a Java 9 code base, and it's not enormous. So it's quite a good place to check. So as I showed you in the beginning, we have the ability to turn on various inspections. And what we've done is we've turned on the local variable, where is it, Java 10. Local variable type can be omitted. I've turned that on. What we can do is we can either run these inspections, all of these inspections, over the whole code base, or what I could do is I could select a specific inspection to run over the whole code base. And here I've already tried to do this. Obviously, I'm trying to run local variable type can be omitted. I'm going to run it over the whole project. I can select a subset if I want to. And then that will give me a bunch of places where I can make this change if I want to. I could, if I really want to, over all 74 instances in the code base, I can just replace all of them right now by pressing one button. I would argue that's not a particularly sensible thing to do, especially if we're just getting to terms with Java 10, we haven't really used it yet, because the point about var is to aid readability. And if we haven't read the code that we're changing, then we don't know whether applying this has helped readability or not. Let me give you some examples from this code base. So in the tests, generally I found, let's expand that up. Generally, I've found that in tests, this is quite useful, because in tests, you declare quite a lot of initialization, quite a lot of setup stuff, and then you might do one thing in the test, and then you do a bit of verification at the end. So in this case, I would argue that changing all of these to use var, which I could have done with my button if I want to, my magic change everything to var button. I don't really care that much about what the types of these things are. These are just, I'm creating these to initialize them, and I have to wire some various things up, and then this is the thing I care about. So I think this is quite a good place to use var. Probably you'll find that in test code, quite a lot of it, you might want to just apply var across the whole thing. So that's a good place to do it. Maybe you could do that without looking at it. But let me show you another example. Let's have a look. Let's look at this example here. So this is a bit more complicated in terms of the code. And here it suggests I can change this to use var. I might not want to do that though, because actually it doesn't have a great name. This comes back down to guideline 1. The name is prop, which is not awesome, but it's actually a map. So it's not super representative of what that is. And here, let's see. Down here, I've got a bunch of different types, which I may or may not want to keep. Strings, I would argue that primitives and strings probably, there's not really much value in changing that, because it's about reducing boilerplate, but things like int and string and float, etc., they're not very long anyway, so you probably don't need to get rid of that type information. And then these things, maybe you might want to keep that there because you might not really know what the implications of that are. You might want to see that type information. You might not. That's the whole point. I don't think I would advocate for making this change across your whole code base, because you probably want to look at specific examples to see, does this improve readability or does it make it a bit more confusing to the person who's reading this code?
Yep. So now we have to decide if we pause answering the questions and proceed with the presentation, or we continue with the questions because we have many other questions about local variables type inference.
Okay, well, I've got 3 more examples to show, which are quite small, and then so I can show those. They might answer some of the questions, and then maybe we'll just move on to questions again after that.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, so these are examples which came from the document we were talking about. Sorry, I'm just going to whiz over here. These were all the guidelines, and then at the bottom we have some examples of good use of var. And I want to look at those inside IntelliJ IDEA. So here it says, use var to break up chained or nested expressions. Oh, that might be one of the guidelines. Use var to break up chained or nested expressions with local variables. So we've got here, if you're familiar with Java 8 by now, which a lot of us are getting there, you can see these streamed operations. And this is a stream operation. I have a stream and a collect. What is not necessarily clear by the way this has been formatted is that this is more than a single stream operation. There's a collection, we turn it into a stream. We do a stream operation on it, and then this is our terminator. This gives us back a set. And then we call stream again, we call another stream operation, and then we do, this returns us a, whoops. This returns us an optional, and then after that, we do a map on the optional. But because the way this has been formatted, it's not at all clear that these are actually 3 different operations happening at the same time. So what we might want to do is we might want to extract this out, extract a variable. This is, let's call it entries. And then maybe we want to extract out the results of the max operation. Let's reformat this so it's a bit less confusing. So here we can see much more clearly that we have an operation here, and then a third operation here. But you can see that the code author might not have wanted to do this because we have a set and it's got generics and there's all this type information here. And we actually don't really care about that because the only thing we're going to do is turn this into a stream. So we didn't really, format that. So we didn't really need to know this because we don't do anything with any knowledge of that. So I can easily turn that into a var. And the same here, I can see it's an optional, but I don't really care necessarily. So I might just change that there. I might just use var there. So this is quite a good place to use var. We're not actually changing anything that's happening in terms of the operations. The same number of operations are happening, probably the same number of CPU cycles and so forth. Again, this is about readability. Because we've managed to reduce the boilerplate by getting rid of that type information, then I can actually extract these things out to make it explicit from a reader's point of view that these are 3 separate operations going on. One of the other places, I've already done the conversion here. Let's show. Hold on. I'll tell you what. I'll steal the original example from here. in there. So this is an example, another example where we have lots and lots and lots of information here. So much so that this initial line of the for loop separates over 2 lines, and it should be an enormously long line. Readability there is almost 0, and so this is a case where we can say we use var there. We can use var there. And again, because in this case, we probably don't care that much about every single piece of information here. We don't really care about the extends, and the generic types and the so on and so forth. We can get rid of that. And if we do care, we can look it up inside the IDE. It will tell us what that is. The final example of where var can aid our readability is, this is inside try with resources, the thing that came in Java 7, which allows us to automatically close things like input streams. We can try with multiple resources. So I've got an input stream reader, a buffered reader, all inside the same try request, if you like. And oops. And that's fine, but I can see this is an input stream. I can see this is an input stream reader. I can see this is a buffered reader. And then I don't really do anything with any of those variables anyway. So this is quite a good place to just reduce the noise and use var there. And that just makes it a little bit more sane. I think var is quite a good thing to use to say either the type information is obvious from this, or I don't care, it doesn't matter to me. And that's not the same as saying it doesn't have a type, and it's not the same as assigning it to object or something like that. The type is still there, you just haven't explicitly written it out anywhere. So those are my examples. Those are my final examples for local variable type inference. I've got a couple of other features that came in Java 10 that might be worth mentioning. They're only small ones. I think I'll cover them quickly now, and then we can go back to questions. Does that seem fair?
Yep.
So one of the new features in Java 9, we got list of, set of, map of, which was really nice. One of my favorite features in Java 9. There's a couple of new methods on these. So I can say list.copy of, and I can say copy of people. And that will give me a copy. And it's an immutable, it's unmodifiable list. So that's quite nice. It's a handy thing. And then if for any reason you change the underlying list people, that won't impact the copy. If you change the individual person objects, that probably will, because you're still pointing to the same person objects. But anyway, you get list.copy of, and the corresponding methods on the other collections as well. That's just kind of useful to know. One of the other new features is, if we have a look at, let me look at an example here. Where am I? Not in the right project. Let's find the right project. Oh, we're in the right project, the one that doesn't work with Java 10 right now, which was fun. Let's see if I can get it to work. I found that if you're changing the JDK, sometimes you do have to sort of clean and rebuild everything so that you can rebuild it in the new version of Java. So I refresh Gradle, and then I rebuild everything, and then I hope that it all works. Okay, great, that's working now. I can use my var keyword without any red. So in Java 10, when I'm doing the streams, a stream operation, quite often with stream operations, you do something like this. You're going to sort it, limit it, do various mapping, do whatever you want to do, and then you're going to collect it to a list. Well, actually, probably what you want to do is you want to collect it to an unmodifiable list. And that's something that came in Java 10 as well. What's my quick documentation? Quick doc. So that came in Java 10. So there's just a few little API changes which are quite nice from Java 10, which you might not be aware of, that are worth mentioning. It's not just the var keyword. That's pretty much all I wanted to cover, I think. So I'm happy to cover any more questions now.
Great. I think we have at least 8 minutes for questions, and yeah, let's try to see how many we can answer. I do expect many questions still about the local variable step inference.
Yes, I expect that's the big thing.
Yep. So when using the diamond operator, we already have the type declared on the other side. Would you consider for IntelliJ IDEA to use that when automatically converting to the new var syntax?
Right, exactly. So what you mean, as far as I can figure out, well, let's just use any one of these examples. Let's say I have a list of, an array list of person. Then if I could Alt and Enter on that, it should be able to use that, pop it into here, and assign that to var. Yeah, in fact, I was just talking to one of the developers earlier on today about that, and that's definitely a suggestion which has come up. I don't want to be the sort of person who makes promises about what may or may not be in IntelliJ IDEA, but it's a good suggestion and an interesting idea.
Yep. Is there a way to show the type of the type the way like Kotlin does? IDEA shows the type in a great block. I do believe the what is meant here is the action called expression type. I do think it works. So if you put the cursor on the variable defined with var and then call on Mac, it should be, I do believe it is Shift Control P or Shift Command P.
B or P?
P.
Are you using the 10 plus? Oh, well, let me look for the action. What's it called?
Expression type.
Expression type. Ah, right.
Yep, this one.
Oh, I was pressing the wrong buttons. That's why. Oh.
No, I don't think probably it doesn't work yet. So you can use the quick documentation pop-up, but maybe yeah, it makes sense to enable this for Java 10 as well.
Yeah.
Maybe
so
yeah.
There's two things I've been using, which is the quick documentation, which shows you the inferred type, and the other one was declaration, wasn't it? Declaration. Type declaration. Is that the right one? Oh, that's the one that. No, that's not what I wanted. Oh, I can't remember. There was one which is quick definition, which is Shift Command and L. Shift Command and I. There we go. Oh, that's not the thing I was thinking of either. Oh, that's right, because it came from them. Oh dear, I'm having a bit of a brain fart. So yes, there's the quick definition, which will take you to where it was defined, and here you can see var, which is not really what we were hoping for. And I've been using, as I said, the quick documentation, which shows you what the inferred type is.
Yep. Okay, moving on. Can the var keyword used inside lambdas?
I have a feeling that's coming in Java 11 because I haven't tried it yet. JDK 11. Local variable syntax for Lambda parameters. And this is JDK 11. So I'm assuming that's what is meant.
Yep.
So let's have a look. Let's give us a Lambda. So could I say var? No. Although actually you don't need to say the type here, right? Because you can just say that's inferred. Anyway, it's coming, but not yet.
Good. There is a question if we can mention any particular features of Java 11, and I think it goes a little bit beyond the scope.
Oh, but I've already done my homework on Java 11. I started playing with it a bit. There's not that much for us as developers yet that has been committed to for Java 11. And so it says that it'll be effectively kind of code complete, I guess, by June. So I'm not sure how much more is going to go in here. I was kind of hoping for some other Lambda leftovers stuff. There's some more stuff from perhaps Project Amber, things like underscore in Lambdas. I was kind of hoping for all of that in Java 11, but so far this is the list, and there's not really that much, which is super exciting right now. Don't let Oracle hear me say that, but it doesn't look super exciting right now.
Yep. Okay. Okay. Browsing through the questions. You mentioned that JDK 11 is LTS. Is it known what the period for it?
Yes.
What is the period for it? Yep.
I'm going to do a bit of Googling right in front of everybody right now. Support map Java. It is, I don't remember what it is off the top of my head. Support Java Oracle. There we go, support roadmap. So it says here, so Java 8 is the long-term support one. It's going to be supported until like next year. And Java 11, this LTS is the long-term support. And it doesn't say what it's going to be supported until. But this is the page you want to find out when it's going to be supported until. And you can see here, it says Java 9, end of public updates March. So Java 9 is done now. It's time to move on to Java 10.
Good. The code you've shown in the presentation, is it available on GitHub anywhere?
As soon as I push it in about 5 minutes time, yes. It's a project called IntelliJ Samples under the JetBrains space. I will add that to the blog post as well.
Yeah, great. Okay. Moving on, maybe just a couple of last questions and then wrapping up. So does the compiled bytecode for local variable defined with var the same as okay, so the question is about generic. So imagine we have a local variable which is assigned to new array list of say person, and then we'd like to compare it to same but with object. So the question, what the inferred type would be? I would guess that it would be exactly as you've specified it in the declaration. So if you assign your variable to a new array list of object, then it will be array list of object. And if you give it the generic type person, then it's going to be array list of person.
I'm not sure exactly what the question is, but what you said sounds sensible. I don't think there's anything super complicated going on under the covers.
Yeah, hopefully it answered the question. And the last one, where are the value types used in Java 10?
Value types. They're not in Java 10.
Yeah, they're not. I've seen some plans, right, about adding them in the blog post by Brian Gotts.
Yeah, value types is a big deal, and in fact, the space that I came from, which is sort of low latency trading, it's a big deal for them because efficient and predictable use of memory and so on and so forth. It's not Java 10. I don't think it's Java 11 either.
Yep.
They're still working on it, basically. They want to get it right. This is the problem with some of the really exciting features, is that it takes a while because they want to get it right.
Yep. Then I think that's it. And we have to wrap up.
If there's anything that we haven't answered or anything which we fluffed over, we'll go through the questions and answer them in the blog post anyway.
Yep. Exactly. So then that's it, right, Trisha? You don't
Yep.
have anything.
I
Good,
don't think
perfect.
so.
Thank you for this wonderful presentation, and it was a great dive into the local variable type inference. I think it's good that we focused on that almost entirely. And yeah, I think everyone learned a few things. Thanks everyone for joining, and appreciate your time. And yeah, come join us for next webinar. And meanwhile, take care and have a good day.